तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Let us now pray together. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, Thou abidest in all, Thou art all, Thou assumest all forms, Thou art the origin and goal of all, Thou art the self of all, Thou art existence, knowledge and bliss. Salutations unto Thee. May the world be peaceful. May the wicked become gentle. May all creatures think of mutual welfare. May their minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Dear friends, I am very happy to announce that we have today a distinguished speaker to address us on an important topic, as you see, Karuna, compassion, in Vedanta and in Buddhist perspectives. Today's speaker is Dr. Anindita Balslev, a scholar with distinction. She is originally from India, then studied apart from in India, in France, US, and in Denmark. She was a former professor of philosophy in Copenhagen, Denmark, and has written many books. Her areas of research are like consciousness, connection between science and religion, religious diversity, and also studies in consciousness. She has written several books on these topics, also a book on the notion of time. So she had spoken here earlier last year on the occasion of Swami Vivekananda's 150th anniversary and his continuing work in United States and in other cultures. So we are very fortunate to have her here amongst us, and I request her to begin her talk today.
Namaskar. I would like to thank Swami Yogatmananda ji for inviting me to spend a few days here at this wonderful center, and again asking me to share some of the ideas that I work with. I had a wonderful few hours last year here when I spoke on the unfinished project of Swami Vivekananda. And this time, as you know, the topic is the idea of compassion in the Hindu-Buddhist traditions. Actually, the Upanishadic and the Buddhist traditions. Now, as an introduction, let me point out a few things. That in today's world, we all seem to be striving to share advanced scientific technology, irrespective of cultural diversity. This is the feature of our contemporary world. And this, as we all know, has facilitated travel and communication in an unprecedented manner and has reduced the time that it used to take to cross over, huge geographical distances previously. But this has created also a new situation for us. Globally speaking, adoption of cutting-edge scientific technology has meant an enlargement of our common public space. And we find that human interactions and exchanges are taking place more intensely than ever before. Given this, we are faced with one challenge. And that challenge which is confronting us today is that this situation demands that we arrive at a consensus with regard to setting standards of norms and norms of actions for various forms, various kinds of human transactions that are taking place, which is actually missing in multiple contexts. Now, what do we need to do for this is we need to search for common values, and which may very well be already embedded in our cultural traditions. But we have to identify these. If we succeed in detecting the overlaps that may be there already in our sense of values, that would tremendously facilitate to reach an agreement with regard to the regulative principles that, as I just said, are now missing in the practical sphere of interactions and exchanges. As is well known, the socio-ethical norms, by and large, everywhere, are closely related to and often derived from the prevailing religious traditions that are preponderant in diverse cultural soils. Even when we talk about secular values, you will find upon analysis they're all very close to what the religious traditions have been telling us long before. Now, speaking of common values, it is generally believed that compassion as a value is universally recognized in the thought traditions that are associated with the religions of the world. Given the fact that the world religions are the primary sources from which we derive our identities, and actually the primary identities you will find that are derived by the largest aggregates of humanity are all drawn from that, as well as the norms and values and the guiding principles of their lives are all provided by the religions of the world. Now, given that, it is important, and we should not shy away from the fact that there are lots of differences among the religious traditions. In terms of metaphysics or mythology, rituals or iconography, you will find a whole lot of difference. But despite all that, what is very interesting to observe is that in the sphere of value orientation, there seems to be some overlaps. Now, I must tell you in this connection that I am not here in order to preach, but only to share with you some of the ideas, the key ideas that can be found in the Upanishadic and Buddhist traditions with regard to compassion as a value. As I focus on this idea of Karuna or compassion in the Upanishadic and the Buddhist tradition, I hope that my effort will be seen as a contribution toward the construal of a common frame of inquiry in which similar concerns with regard to norms and values recommended by all other world religions may gradually be incorporated. This, I firmly believe, is a task that still remains before us. Some work is, of course, going on for a long time, but still it is not completed. It is still an unfinished project. Indeed, the idea of Karuna plays a vital role in shaping the ethos of both the Upanishadic and the Buddhist traditions. Existing literature shows how cultural preoccupations with the normative concerns have not only induced deep analysis of the idea in all its theoretical bearings, but also these are important for the discernment of the kind of effect that a genuine practice of compassion or karuna may be said to have on the lives of individuals and societies. This is a very worthwhile project, I believe. And we find that in the literature, at least in these two traditions that I'm dealing with here this evening, is constantly referring to the lives of some exalted personalities who had acted in accordance with this value and have exemplified its transformative power. That is the thing. And thereby demonstrating to us a norm of behavior which is worth respecting and emulating. Why we must act that way, why we must follow that path. Now, while exposing these ideas as an academic, I have to tell you that I will just refer to very briefly to a few very major texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the philosophies of yoga, and Advaita Vedanta from the Upanishadic tradition, so that you see these are the ideas that are actually there. And in the Buddhist field of inquiry, I will refer to Madhyamika and Vijnanavada schools literature a little bit. And my aim is not only just to, it's not an expression of erudition, but rather to a way of showing that, see, despite whatever metaphysical differences they have, they also have these overlaps in these traditions. And I believe there are overlaps in the field, in the sphere of values among all the religions of the world. But I should not say that. I would like to see that the work is actually done. Now, this is my brief introduction. It is a fact that many narratives have been handed down to us, touching upon the lives of great exemplars. You remember that they actually tell you what the idea is. The idea is not merely theoretical construal. And both the Upanishadic and the Buddhist traditions are full of such narratives. And these are very illuminating because these actually help us to understand and discern the conceptual content on the one hand of what the idea of compassion is all about. At the same time, it tells you what is the norm of behavior that we must also incorporate into our own lives. Let me first turn to the Buddhist tradition. You know, it has been said in a number of texts that Gautama Buddha, immediately upon obtaining his enlightenment, was actually hesitating. He was pondering over whether to pass into nirvana or to remain among those who are immersed in suffering and ignorance in order to show them the way to enlightenment. So these alternatives were present before him and he was hesitating. Now it is said that by adopting the second of the two alternatives, that is, by deciding to stay among those who are immersed in suffering and ignorance, that he emerges before us as an outstanding world teacher. The tradition says that the founder of Buddhism could win over his initial hesitation out of karuna or compassion for all living beings in order to fully disclose to them the path that would end all suffering. It is said, I don't know whether you have heard, that Buddha was no tight-fisted teacher. And it always used to strike me, this expression, tight-fisted teacher, which means this is not a man who held anything back. He has given it all. And so that anything that could be of significance for the attainment of Buddhahood has all been already transferred, or has already been given to us. The appellation of the compassionate one was indeed attributed to him precisely because of that. Apart from this, there are many other stories, and some of which you may already know, and which that speak of, through the centuries, of his great sympathy for those subjected to suffering and of his willingness to toil for the freedom of all. The idea of universal suffering, as you know, emerges as the first of the Four Noble Truths. That is how Buddha's teachings are classified. He preached these Four Noble Truths. He pointed out its cause, declared that it can be ended, and indicated the path by following which the attainment of nirvana is possible. And these are the contents of the second, third, and the fourth Noble Truths. The first is universal suffering, that is there. Now, I can't get into that. There will not be time for me. Otherwise, these are all very interesting ideas and very deep ideas. But what is most important for a brief exposition of Buddhism that I'm doing is that the idea of Mahakaruna, the idea of the great compassion that you find in the Mahayana literature. This is something that truly deserves attention, both of theoreticians who seek to construe the idea of compassion as a value, and also for those who want to comprehend the impact of this idea on our practical life. It may be briefly mentioned in this connection that there are records of discussions on such subtle theoretical issues as whether there is any conflict between emotion and reason. All kind of questions arose and all kind of answers are given that are all recorded in this literature. Now, is it so that reason and emotion, these two are trying to compete with each other in order to control and guide human actions? The ideal of bodhisattva that the Mahayanas, Buddhists actually advocated very carefully is minutely analyzed, and it is especially noteworthy because it will show you, I can't go through the process now, it will show you that these two ideas of pragya, which means wisdom, and compassion, which is karuna, they say these are nothing but two sides of the same coin. If you have wisdom, you will be compassionate. That is, look at that. That is the sign. If a person is totally compassionate, it means he already has the wisdom. So there is no trace of conflict between reason and emotion can be detected in this analysis. The great compassion becomes a major theme in the Madhyamika and the Vijnanavada schools in their philosophical discourses. Here we come across new insights into the way the ideal of nirvana, that is the ideal that he was putting in front, that how this idea has to be understood. And there is a difference between, as we say, in the early Buddhist literature and the later Mahayana literature, there is a difference in interpretation. Well, the striving for achieving nirvana as well as the attainment of the ideal state of an arhat. An arhat was the person in the early Buddhist literature is depicted as a person who through self-effort could get over these limitations that causes suffering, that causes rebirth. But when we come to the bodhisattva ideal, it is not the ideal of how to become an arhat, but bodhisattva ideal, some new things begin to appear. They say it is a complete removal of ignorance. It's not only kleshavarana, but geyavarana. In other words, the goal of attainment of nirvana is perceived not merely as a case where the aspirant is striving to become an arhat by obtaining freedom from rebirth and suffering, but is understood as an aspiration to become a bodhisattva who tirelessly works for a universal, unconditional deliverance of all beings. Keeps on doing that. For a deeper philosophical appreciation of the march of Buddhist thought, it is of primary importance to notice how, what with the philosophical terminology is Advayavad, an understanding of the non-duality. It is not exactly like Advaita Vedanta, it has different connotations in it, but the ontological principle is non-dual. All these ideas merit a detailed study, and I cannot get into that in this talk. It may be briefly observed here that the philosophical development that has considerably enriched the Indian conceptual world, these ideas have definitely done, and lots of discussions have taken place. And this has a very profound impact on the thought of all religions, all regions, wherever Buddhism is a force. Wherever Buddhism has gone, it has taken with them all these ideas. It's a major influence. Gradually, the idea of Karuna came to receive a profound and a subtle treatment in the hands of philosophers, and they, of course, brought out the rich and the varied nuances of this idea, and I want to tell you about that. This is absolutely fascinating. Now, the question is asked that to whom will we bestow compassion if I have to practice that? Is there a boundary of persons, space, and time? In other words, does this compassion brook with any such distinction that can be drawn between who deserves compassion and who does not deserve compassion? Indeed, it is directed to all and not meant only for a chosen few. So there is no boundary of persons. Again, it is also asked that was this idea of great compassion valid only when Buddha was alive, or for a certain or few centuries? And then they are saying, no, this is a bestowal on humanity that continue for ages and ages. That means no boundary of time. It will always remain valid. Then there comes this idea that not only it is not limited to a specific period of time, the compassion of the Buddha is not only meant for only a few, it is not only meant for his contemporaries or just for his own kinsmen, and nor is it only for those who deserve it. This great compassion cuts through all boundaries. Philosophers, these are philosophical treatment of this notion of compassion. Now let me turn to the Vedic tradition, the Upanishadic tradition, and they have also explored the idea of compassion and grace, Karuna and Kripa, with great sensitivity. Much literary material is available that throw light on these ideas. It may be mentioned here that, in the Buddhist literature, in some places you will find the appellation Bhagavan Buddha. Precisely because he said that, it is very interesting because that overlaps with the Hindu theistic understanding of Ishvara, God, Bhagavan Buddha, which means he is endowed with perfections, powers, and splendors, not unlike the God of the theists. It is of special significance in the context of the present discussion to notice that above all, he is attributed that appellation of Bhagavan, not unlike God in theism. It is because of he is attributed this capacity of having this great compassion. It is that which is the mark that he is a great one. Now, actually there are terms like Tathagata in Buddhism and Ishvara in the yoga tradition. They are all adored and worshipped as teachers. Notice this. Teacher, the position of the teacher is very high in these traditions, because it is the teacher who will show you the path by following which the ultimate freedom becomes possible for everyone, for others. The traditions say that it is out of great compassion or karuna for all living beings that they teach. This is precisely why Ishvara in the yoga tradition of Patanjali's is venerated as the ultimate teacher. That is, the teacher of all teachers. He is the Parama Guru. That is why, if you say, I have learned this from my teacher, from whom has the teacher learnt, and you go, so it will be infinite regress. So the final kind thing is that it is all taught by Ishvara. He is the Parama Guru, the ultimate teacher. So that is the position. It is also noteworthy the way the Buddhist tradition has highlighted this idea, is a very powerful idea of Tathagata Garbha. Do you know what that means? That means that the germ of Buddhahood is present in everybody. In other words, the striving for Buddhahood is entirely for manifesting that which is already present in us. And this is why the sacred functions of the Buddhas, in the plural, is the Buddhas are the possessors of knowledge of equality. Samatagyanam is to unceasingly, untiringly pursue to help free all creatures in bondage. This is a superb analysis that touches upon the crucial question regarding how exactly wisdom and compassion can go hand in hand. Unless you are compassionate, you will not be so worried about teaching everyone. And if you have the knowledge, that means you already have the samatha jnana. You already know that everybody has this germ of Buddhahood in them, and it becomes your duty to do it. You can't escape that. You cannot be egoistic about it. The contribution of the Upanishadic tradition is simply immense. The thinkers of this tradition have demonstrated with great philosophical dexterity how attainment of knowledge and compassion are closely linked together. It is not only the theists, but also the Advaitins. They have engaged themselves in that task. In the Bhagavad Gita, we come across the idea of work born of unmotivated compassion. The chapter called Karma Yoga in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna, the Lord, is saying that there is nothing in all the three worlds which I do not already possess. Nothing I have yet to acquire. Na me parthaste kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana. If that is the case, then why is he working? He is working, all his work, it is said, is for the sake of the benefit of humankind. Loka sangraha. This is Karuna at the highest level of expression. It is noteworthy that for the Advaitins, who propounded the idea of the essential ontological non-duality, the applicability of compassion was not only for the sake of abstract soteriological purposes. It is not only because you want to obtain salvation that you want to practice this. In fact, in the recent past, we have encountered a formidable example of the practical impact of the idea of non-duality as understood in the Advaitic position, in the tradition. In the late 19th century, this is vividly exemplified in the life of Swami Vivekananda. As an enthusiastic and inspired interpreter of Vedanta, he was not only vigorously propagating the message of Vedanta, but also worked tirelessly for an implementation of the idea. That is the thing. It is not only just an ideal, a theoretical value, but it has to be practiced. And he saw that as an integral part of the Vedantic teaching. This led him, as we all know, to make this program for social upliftment, which is described as practical Vedanta. This is one of the finest examples, I think, in recent times, demonstrating how to employ a value-oriented religious concept in the sphere of daily practical life for the benefit of all, and especially those who are marginalized, those who are oppressed. And Swami Vivekananda, as you know, was keenly aware of that and did everything that he could do to make others aware of that. Indeed, as we seek to figure out a way of acting in the everyday world, one important lesson that can be derived from the analysis of values like compassion, in diverse religious traditions is how to harmonize reason and emotion. Reason says one thing, emotion says another thing. That's the case in our daily life. This is precisely why the envisioning of a cohesive collective life calls for setting up of a forum, for creating awareness about the overlapping contents in value orientation in the context of religious diversity. And that is why interfaith movement is so important. With this in view, let me turn to this important facet of philosophical analysis that seeks to comprehend the idea of compassion both in cognitive and emotive terms. This is helpful for assessing the role that certain emotions and volition play in the moral and spiritual advancement of humankind by facilitating the attainment of knowledge and for dispelling ignorance. Now, in Patanjali's yoga philosophy, for example, it is clearly mentioned that purification of the mind, chitta parikarma, is necessary for getting rid of a disturbed state of mind. It is clearly stated that it is not possible to attain serenity or one-pointedness, ekagrata, which is the goal of yogic meditation. You cannot achieve that if the mind is in a disturbed state. The pursuit of yoga is not possible if you have not acquired that calmness. But how does one acquire that purification? That question may be asked. As an answer to that question, you find there is a statement which stipulates that apart from meditating on God, just see, they're giving you an option. Apart from meditating on God, Ishvara Pranidhana, there are other courses that can help the aspirant to achieve this, how you can get rid of a disturbed state of mind. Now, for this, you can see that what they have recommended in unambiguous terms is saying the mind becomes tranquil by the cultivation of amity, compassion, goodwill, and indifference. Toward whom? This is very interesting. Listen to this carefully. This you can practice. We can all practice, actually. Amity, that is friendship. Friendships toward whom? Friendship toward those who are happy. You understand the implication? Don't be envious of those who are happy. Practice friendship towards them. Second is compassion towards those who are miserable. That I will go into more detail in a moment. Goodwill toward those who are virtuous. Don't be envious of those who are virtuous. Have goodwill, wish them success. And indifference towards those who are vicious. Don't hate them, remain indifferent. What a marvelous, marvelous ethical injunction. Let us mainly focus on the question, on whom should compassion be bestowed? Because that is my concern here. As an answer to this, Vyasa is the commentator, Patanjali is the sutrakar. He is telling that an aspirant should always practice compassion toward all those who are suffering. Dukkhiteshu karuna. Now, who precisely are these dukkhis? Who are the persons they're talking about, who are the sufferers that the text is referring to? And this has to be, I would like to come back to. There are several important points to appreciate in this connection. Firstly, emphasis is laid on the fact that it is through the practice of compassion one gradually transcends the barriers between the self and the other, between us and them. Secondly, this practice also needs to be seen as one of the primary means for overcoming all tendencies to vile others. Paro apokar. Never engage in that. Finally, a sincere cultivation of karuna in speech, thought, and action. And that is all the time told in the Indian tradition, in the Indian philosophical discourse, that it is not only in speech, not only in action, but also in your thought you have to practice this. It is not enough that I have not killed anyone. I must not say that I have killed anyone. I wish to kill anyone. I must not even think that I will engage myself into any such action. So all these three layers have to be observed. Now, what is to be seen is that this is not exclusively a socio-ethical goal. When I'm referring to other people in a society, it looks like it is a part of social ethics that we're discussing. It is not only that. It is indeed an integral and indispensable part of the process for achieving a state of one-pointedness, ekagrata, without which discriminatory knowledge, viveka jnana, cannot be obtained. Look at the thing. This has to be practiced in actual social practical life, even if you wished actually only for the obtainment of moksha. You cannot get that without this. So people think that some religious life, those who pursue, they ignore the society. It's complete rubbish, according to this tradition. In this way, it is also serving the salvatory goal. You are getting two at the same time. Now, since it is recommended that compassion must be shown toward the dukkhis, this is very interesting. They say you practice compassion toward those who are suffering. But who are these persons who are undergoing suffering that towards whom I would practice compassion? Who does this word dukkhi actually refer to? Now, I mentioned this question earlier. Now, they are saying, the question is asked that is it meant that compassion is to be practiced only when we find that our friends and relatives are undergoing suffering? Collectively speaking, the question can be posed as to whether this recommendation is designated exclusively for our allies, with whom we have clearly drawn out pacts for guarding our common interests, so that we think it to be worthwhile to bring help to them when they and only they suffer. That may be from flood or famine, maybe they are attacked, maybe there is a civil war going on, and we should remain just indifferent if this happen to others, no matter how this otherness is construed. Is that what it is saying? Now, there was a very, in recent times, this yogi who has left us a very huge, fat volume called Patanjala Darshana in Bengali, where part of it has been translated into English. He has commented on this sutra. And then he is pointing out that Karuna or Anukampa is finding a synonym for it. He further emphasizes that the word dukkhi is meant not only those, by that word is not meant only those who are considered to be friends. It is meant both for mitra and amitra. It is meant both as friends as well as opponents and even enemies. You practice even towards them. Astonishing ideas. All these above readings bring out clearly the overlapping contents in the theoretical analysis of the recommendations regarding the practice of karuna that prevail in the Upanishadic and the Buddhist traditions. It is especially noteworthy that these traditions unanimously recognize karuna or compassion is not just a fleeting sentiment, but that it is firmly based on knowledge of the unity of all beings. Because that knowledge is there, that's why this practice is possible. And as you more and more practice, you go towards obtaining that knowledge. These things are like that. The exalted beings that truly practice compassion do it for the sake of all living beings without any discrimination. There's no question of any self-seeking or egoistic goal that motivates or pursued them in this matter. Now I'm coming to almost the end of my presentation. Let me just tell you one more thing. The There are a few more important statements from both from the Upanishadic and the Buddhist traditions to exemplify these ideas. You know, I was actually struck when I read the Gita the first time critically, that when Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, who is the greatest yogi? I thought it was a very difficult, very tough question. Who is the greatest yogi? But Sri Krishna promptly replies that one who makes the happiness and suffering of all his own is the greatest yogi. Same idea. Samatha Jnana is there. Atmopomenna sarvatra samam pashyati. O Arjuna, sukham va yadiva dukkham sa yogi paramamata. In one sentence, he's again giving you, in a nutshell, the same idea. Now, there was a Buddhist scholar called Aryadev who has actually very much discussed. He is overwhelmed by this idea of benign intention as reflected in the practice of Karuna by the enlightened ones, the Buddhas. He says, no exertion or activity of the Buddhas is without meaning or purpose. Their very breath is for the good and welfare of all beings. Before concluding this brief exposition on the idea of compassion in the Upanishadic and the Buddhist philosophical tradition, let me again draw attention to the importance of sharing the teachings of all world religions. We need to uncover in collaboration the social, ethical, and religious dimensions of the values that are taught. It seems to me that so far, living in a technological civilization has virtually meant that we have achieved an unprecedented power to cross geopolitical boundaries. Within a short span of time, but really not much progress has been made as yet with regard to removing the hard boundaries that thwart mutual understanding among the adherents of even the major world religions. It has still not happened, it's still not taken place. It is evident that if we are to form a sense of a global community, this simply cannot be achieved through mere repetition of such political slogans as one world, the new world order, or interdependent world. It's not enough just to repeat these slogans and at the same time bypass the need for an authentic encounter of world religions, and by allowing terror and bloodshed in the name of religious differences to continue. The sphere of value orientation has not been explored properly as yet. We are only thinking about the differences, and we are avoiding the overlaps, and we are especially avoiding the question of values. And what is very important is to understand that understanding these ideas, it is not just an academic pursuit. This is not just for a theoretical reason that we need to do it. And this is not only for an otherworldly goal, that we have an otherworldly goal, a salvatory goal or something like that, only because of which we need to understand these ideas. These ideas have tremendous impact on all human affairs in this world itself. Obviously, if we are to transcend the perpetual conflict between the good of one, good of some, and the good of all, and are willing to take upon ourselves a sense of social responsibility and accountability for human suffering, we need to know more about where lie the overlaps in value orientations and be aware of the fact, as I said in the beginning, that the secular values constantly tap from religious traditions anyway. It is time to recognize our common values. Thank you.
Dear friends, that was a very thought-provoking lecture. Do you have any questions? Yes, Shravani, you can ask your question.
Compassion is part of every religion beyond Buddhism and Sanatana. So it's part of every religion. So are you saying something beyond religion or reading the structure?
No, I am.
That's number one, and number two is you were referring to overlap. That I did not. Where is the overlap?
Overlap like, okay, let me first say that, Yes, I think it is common to all world religions, but I don't want to make any pronouncement about it because I want to see it actually happening. I want to see that we have done some seminars, some conferences on that, but I want to see that the interfaith movement pushes this kind of agenda where we understand which are the ideas, which are the recommendations, what is a specific religious tradition is recommending and what it is forbidding. We must have that entire picture before us, at least of all the major religions. And then we can see whether in these recommendations there are overlaps, whether they are saying the same thing. Here I was pointing out in the Hindu-Buddhist traditions, I gave several examples and analysis to show you how the same idea of samatha jnana, same idea that compassion is not to be restricted only within your own people, the people who belong to your tradition or to your nation, to your friends, etc., how this has been analyzed and shown that it cuts through all the boundaries of space, time, and persons. And these ideas are common. So there lie the overlaps.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Really quickly, have you heard of the whole world is a single flower conference?
What? I didn't hear you.
Have you heard of the whole world is a single flower conference in Korea?
No, I have not.
Oh, and they also talk about what you're talking about.
They're doing these kind of things?
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, Swamiji.
I'm curious, in some of my meanderings online, I mean, there's a large percentage of people engaged in a conversation who have no interest in religion, and it's showing that, in many parts of the world, religion is very much out of fashion, and certainly in this country, among the young, it's almost disappearing. So we have this very high ideal of compassion and having to kind of foster that for this intercultural dialogue. How do you approach that sector of the population? How are you going to, without a religious practice, without a religious ideal,
Yes.
how are we going to inculcate these values or this responsibility in
Yes.
somebody that doesn't share a worldview?
Yes. Yes, and that is precisely why I said that, if the focus is on the value, nobody can deny whether you are a secular person or a religious person or whatever your commitment to any ideology is. No one can say that we don't need some common standards, common norms of behavior. How will we get that? Now you can say that, okay, it is not religion, but we accept compassion. We accept human solidarity, and we have seen all these things, But eventually, of course, we can claim that these are all derived from the religious traditions anyway. Even if would a secular man say it is not love is not a good thing or compassion is not a good thing? Nobody would say that actually in the right frame of mind. But how to bring them together? This is why if the focus is on a value, and then you ask people who are religious, who are not religious, who are anti-religious, let them be together and let us talk about values. What should be how do we, create a more harmonious order among human beings of all races and ethnicities? How do we create a more harmonious order between the human and the non-human living world? Take the animals and the plants. See the catastrophe that takes place in ecological domain. How do we create between us and the non-living world, take earth, fire, water, air, how we are polluting, what we are doing. So these questions can be brought in, and no one can actually close the eyes to what have been the contributions of our various religious traditions. Let them hear the ideas and let them come up with their ideas. I don't see any conflict in that. Let them engage in the actual contemporary concerns. And focusing on values, focusing on problems and issues, let them just do that. Let us do that. We do not have to force anybody to have to belong to any religious tradition at all. At all. This is one way of beginning the conversation. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because there are many such, philosophical controversies are there, whether compassion and non-violence the same or not, and there will be lot of overlaps, but there could be emphasis differently given. That it can be, but these are not contradictory values. It is not one rejects the other, one denies the other. But there are discussions about not only compassion, non-violence, also charity, whether these are all equal, or there are also, there are votaries of people who, some would say compassion is the greatest, some would say non-violence is the greatest. Those who preach charity, they would say no. But then the question was that what is the intention and attitude of the doer in a given context when you are saying that daya, charity, kindness, I will show. Is it that you are in a worse position than I am, so I am in a position to do some daya, some charity towards you. And that is what makes them angry. The compassion people is, no, we don't want to see anybody is lower than me. It is because of my identification that I'm doing. So these are all analysis. And non-violence is also that way. Non-violence is also that way. What is actually your intention? What is the motive? The whole idea is that I do not consider anybody to be less than me. When I practice this, I do not practice it because of attaining any superior feeling. Then you are actually betraying the ethical stance. So these analyses are there. I don't know whether your question had any other shade of meaning which I have not caught. Yeah, I could not hear.
As I understand it, he is asking if deliverance of justice needs violence, then will you call that deliverance of justice as an act of compassion or not?
Yes, I will. It is also an act of non-violence, because if you do not deliver justice, it means you are being violent towards someone. That means you have not done justice. So these are all very closely connected. We have a bunch of words, but when we have to, that is why we need conversation to explore the conceptual content of each ideal and see which one comes to one. Indian philosophers were doing that. That is why they had all this idea of daya, karuna, ahimsa. The objection against ahimsa was that this is a negatively constituted word. Ahimsa, ma himsa, ahimsa. So, but compassion is a positive word. So these kind of quarrels are there. But actually, if you look into the content, there's a lot of overlaps.
I have a question now. Since biologically living things strive for self-preservation, would a different approach to implement the all-faith movement to be expressing self-preservation in terms of the individual helping themselves and others to achieve that unity as in a more positive way, for example, isolation, being emotionally self-destructive, but socializing with others and helping others being more productive?
I don't know whether I got the real thrust of your question. You are saying that by isolating, are you meaning that is it a life of contemplation or a life of actual engagement? Which one will be considered as more Vedantic? Is that the kind of question you are asking? Or?
More is it possible to balance self-preservation and the help of others and being equal in mutual ways?
Yeah. Why would you think that engaging in doing something for others is a mode of acting that is against self-preservation? Maybe it is even better. Maybe it is even, it would give you a sense of such self-fulfillment that you will preserve yourself even in a 1,000 times better way.
Because some people that like to help others because they naturally get cheered up from helping others, as well as for intrusive, selfish reasons too.
Selfish reason is what one has to be avoiding. Yeah. That is what has to be avoided. It should not be, you must not pretend to help somebody when your actual goal is only to pretend to help yourself. Then you are not, that is a pretension, then it is a hypocrisy, you see. That one has to be honest about it. There is. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to me.
So friends, let us actually congratulate ourselves to be privileged to listen to such a wonderful lecture. Before this talk, I was thinking how is our today's presenter, Dr. Anindita Balslev, is going to bring this idea and make it, as a means of our religious practice, and also meaningful in various religious traditions. And she did the job. She presented it, showing how these ideas of compassion in all different religions, they are very helpful as means of spiritual practice, religious practice. And it, as she pointed out, that it was thought that if I am pursuing reason, how can I do justice to my emotions? That is one, caring for people. Another, just attaining wisdom. But she showed that how not only they are not contradictory to each other, but how they complement each other. That it is, in fact, their presence is concomitant. The wisdom brings out that's awareness of oneself in all, and then that automatically means that you are compassionate. It is not showing mercy, as she at the end pointed out, that it is not that you are above, superior to somebody and you are doling out some gifts to someone. It is the feeling of oneness. It is like if one hand is hurt, other is nursing it without any feeling of superiority. That oneness is, therefore, automatically breeds compassion. And if we practice compassion, that is the important transformative aspect of it. If we practice compassion, our wisdom actually will enhance. And this is across all different religions. You can see, Jesus mentions that you have heard earlier that love your friends and hate your enemies. But I tell you, love your enemies. It is loving friends. Anybody is going to love friends. But our spiritual enhancement becomes possible when we learn to love our enemies. So, and how wonderfully she handled all the diverse questions that you wise in the audience have asked, and she tackled them, answered them so beautifully. So, my thanks to her for giving us this beautiful lecture.